She was only 19 when her parents forced her to marry an Apache warrior she had spoken to for no more than 3 sentences. The whole town believed she was being traded away. Everyone waited to see what the man would demand on their wedding night. But then, on the very day of the wedding, he stepped forward in front of everyone and gave her a gift that made every man in town lower his eyes to the ground. People in Mesilla Ridge still tell this story more than 30 years later, every time someone dares to speak ill of the Apache. Not because of war, not because of gunfire, but because of a wedding that was quiet until the moment it brought an entire town to complete silence. In 1887, Mesilla Ridge was a dusty strip of land in New Mexico, where one long red earth road cut through town and a single saloon kept its lamps burning late. Folks lived off cattle, hides, and long days under the sun, and anything important, peace, bargains, disputes, was decided by men in the saloon, never by women in the kitchen. Lena Carter, then 19, was the daughter of a small rancher. Gentle, hard-working, soft-spoken, never one to stand out, but well-liked by the whole town. No one imagined her life would veer into a completely different path in a single afternoon. That day, her father called her into his room and closed the door. "Lena, you have to marry," he said, his voice strained. "Marry who?" He answered without looking her in the eyes. "An Apache warrior. His name is Dasan." The words made the small room feel like it cracked open. Lena stood still, her legs turning to stone. "Papa, I've never even talked to him. Why me?" Mr. Carter let out a tired breath. "The Apache have agreed to sign a peace treaty, but they want a marriage bond to seal it. Our family was chosen." Lena knew what chosen meant. Her family did not have enough money to refuse. Her father owed the authorities a few debts, and she, a 19-year-old girl who had never left town, was the easiest thing to offer. "I don't get a choice?" she whispered, tears gathering. He turned away. "If this treaty fails, war comes back. Our family won't survive it." Lena understood, but understanding did nothing to calm her fear. That night, she sat alone on the porch, staring at the northern ridge, the land where the Apache lived, the land she would soon belong to. She remembered the stories she had heard since childhood. Apache men were fierce, wild, men who treated women as possessions, and now she was to marry one, a man she had never spoken more than 3 sentences to. On the other side of those mountains, beneath the flicker of firelight, Dasan, 34, tall and broad as a storm-bent tree, listened as the elder spoke of the marriage. He stayed silent for a long time, then asked one simple question. "The girl, is she willing?" The elder avoided the answer. "This is how both sides will keep the peace." Dasan's hand curled slowly into a fist. Peace built on someone else's fear was not the peace he believed in. But if this marriage protected his people, he would carry the weight. He did not know the girl feared him, and Lena did not know the man hated the idea of forcing a future on her just as much. That night, 2 people lay awake on opposite sides of the Mesilla Mountains, one afraid her life was being taken from her, the other afraid he was being turned into the man who would take it, and by tomorrow morning, they would be husband and wife. Lena's wedding took place on a morning so hot, the red dust on the road seemed to rise in waves. Mesilla Ridge had never been this quiet. People lined both sides of the dirt street, speaking in low murmurs as the 19-year-old girl walked with her father, looking as if she were being led into a life that no longer belonged to her. Her dress was simple but clean, her face pale, her hands trembling just enough for a careful eye to see. When she reached the open space where the ceremony would be held, she saw Dasan standing alone in the sun. He was so tall that even his shadow looked twice the size of an ordinary man's. His Apache attire was plain. His long black hair was tied back. His face was strong, but his eyes were calm in a way that made the distance between their worlds feel even wider. The preacher began the vows. Around them, the usual whispers of Mesilla Ridge spread through the crowd. Poor girl. Good Lord, look at that man. What will happen on their wedding night? Lena wanted to cover her ears, but couldn't. When the preacher asked, "Do you take this man?" she swallowed hard and whispered, "I do." Then it was Dasan's turn. He answered immediately, his voice low and steady. "I do." No hesitation, no bitterness, no fear. Just a commitment spoken as if it had already been settled long before today. The ceremony ended, and the air tightened like a rope pulled to its last fiber. Everyone watched, waiting for the Apache man to claim her, to drag her toward his people, to demand something no one wanted to imagine. But Dasan did none of the things they expected. He simply bowed to Lena, a small but deep bow that made several women in town widen their eyes. Then he reached into the leather bag at his side and pulled out a rolled piece of tanned hide. A few men instinctively touched the guns at their belts, but Dasan unrolled the hide slowly, deliberately. It was a bilingual agreement written in Apache and English, stamped with the red handprint of his tribal elder. He held it up for everyone to see and said clearly, "I give my wife full rights to the water from the eastern spring, forever. No one from my tribe may enter the land belonging to her family." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. The eastern spring was prized water, steady year-round, something the town had argued over for years. But Dasan wasn't done. He turned to Lena, and the look in his eyes was not ownership. It was certainty, respect. A man giving what he chose to give. "And I vow I will not touch her until she wishes it. I will not lay a hand on her without her consent." Silence fell over the entire town. The ugly whispers from minutes before vanished like dust in the wind. People stared at one another, then at Lena. She stood frozen. She didn't know what to say or how to breathe, but in that moment, she understood something with absolute clarity. What Dasan had given her was not a gift to boast about. It was a respect no one in town believed an Apache man could offer, a protection they never expected, and a freedom she thought she had lost the moment she was forced into this marriage. But the stranger she was told to fear had given it back to her, in front of everyone. Right after the ceremony, Lena was taken toward the northern edge of town, where Apache land began. No one forced her onto a horse, yet Dasan walked slowly, his long, steady strides always pausing just enough to make sure she could keep up. Lena stayed nearly 3 steps behind him, keeping what she believed was a necessary distance. But he kept the same distance too, never closer, never farther. Moving like a man intent on protecting her without crossing a line. When they reached the edge of the camp, he pointed to a small wooden lodge with thick hide stretched across the roof. "You will stay here," he said. Not commanding, not soft, simply stating a direction. Lena looked around and saw Apache families watching her. No mocking, no whispering. Just quiet curiosity, as if she were a strange new chapter in their daily life. Inside the lodge, everything was startlingly neat. A low wooden bed covered with a hand-woven blanket, a small table with a full water jug. Dasan set his bag down and said, "I sleep outside. If you need anything, call." Lena nodded. She hadn't expected him to share a bed, but she also hadn't expected him to stay that far away. "I thank you for what you did in front of the town," she whispered. Dasan replied, "You do not owe me thanks. That was your right." That first night, Lena lay awake listening to the wind sliding across the hide roof and the soft steps of Apache guards outside. Dasan sat leaned against a post on the porch, awake but not watching her, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon as if he were guarding something more important than himself. The next morning, he stood as soon as she stepped outside. "I will show you the water, the safe paths," he said, "so you will not fear getting lost." He didn't speak much for the rest of the morning. He pointed to trails, explained markers on stones, described how to read the wind. Lena walked behind, surprised by how he always let her go first on narrow paths and kept his distance when the path widened. He didn't act like the men in town who used manners to impress. He acted like someone carefully building a circle of safety around her. No touching, no pressure, no expectation that she speak. On the third evening, she struggled to start a fire, coughing as smoke stung her eyes. Dasan watched her for a moment, then quietly said, "Let me." He lit the fire in 10 seconds, then stepped back immediately without a hint of triumph. He did not tease her or act superior. He simply helped and returned to his usual distance. Sometimes she caught him watching her, but every time she turned, he looked away fast, as if afraid he had crossed an unseen line. Strangely, that made her less afraid of him. And for the first time, Lena realized the man the town called savage was more careful and considerate than most men she had known. The first 3 days passed slowly but without heaviness. Lena still remembered she had been forced into this marriage. She still carried fear, but beneath it, something else began to take shape. A faint, quiet sense of peace. No one threatened her in the camp. No one demanded she cook, work, or perform any duty. And Dasan, the man everyone assumed would claim his rights as a husband, kept several steps away, slept outside, and told her simply, "You owe me nothing." On that third night, as she lay on the low wooden bed, Lena suddenly realized something she couldn't ignore. It had been 3 days, and Dasan had not touched her. Not even by accident, not even once. And it was that very restraint that left her unsure of how she should treat him in return. On the 4th morning, Lena woke earlier than usual. When she opened the lodge door, she found Dasan sitting beside a thick log, sharpening a blade with steady, practiced movements. He was so focused that he didn't notice her standing there watching. It was the first time she'd ever observed him this long without him turning away. The early light traced along his shoulders, outlining the powerful curve of his arms, chest, and back. Lena quickly looked aside, embarrassed. But right then, Dasan glanced up and their eyes met. She startled, and he hesitated for a breath before saying quietly, "I can move farther if it makes you uncomfortable." Lena shook her head faster than she intended. "No, I was only looking at what you were working on." He set the knife down and pointed to the log. "The support beam for the porch. Last night's wind was strong." Lena looked at his hands, scarred not from battle but from work. The kind of marks her own father, considered the household's provider, rarely had. As she prepared to step away, the distant sound of children crying caught her ear. She turned to see 2 Apache boys tugging at a small wooden toy knife, one crying while the other tried to hide it behind his back. Lena froze, unsure how to intervene. But Dasan walked over. He knelt so he was level with them, his voice low and warm. "No one keeps a toy by making someone else cry. If you want to hold it, be good enough that he chooses to give it to you." The boys went silent. The smaller one offered the toy back. Head bowed. The older one bowed too. Then they ran off together, as if the quarrel had never happened. Lena watched, surprised into stillness. "Do you always teach the children that way?" she asked. Dasan stood, brushing dust from his hands. "They listen if you speak in a way they can understand." The simplicity of the answer stayed with her. Later that afternoon, an older Apache woman passed by. She studied Lena from head to toe, then unexpectedly placed a handful of dried seeds in her palm and pointed to the empty patch of ground behind the lodge. Lena didn't understand and looked to Dasan for help. He translated, "She says if you want something to do, plant them there. No one will step on your land unless you invite them." Lena was taken aback. No one in town had ever offered her land for anything, much less a stranger. "Why would she give me these?" she asked. Dasan thought a moment before answering, "Because you are my wife, and because I told them I wanted you to have peace." Lena stood still for a long second. No one in her life had ever spoken of her peace as something worth protecting. Near dusk, she carried water from the creek and nearly slipped on the wet stone. Before she could gasp, a strong hand caught her arm and steadied her. Dasan released her immediately, as if holding her even 1 second longer would be disrespectful. "Be careful," he said softly. Lena nodded, her heartbeat oddly fast. It was the first time he had touched her, brief, gentle, and full of respect. That night, lying inside the lodge, she realized something had shifted. The fear she carried since the wedding no longer felt sharp. It had been replaced by something else. Curiosity, not about the tribe, not about her new life, but about the man named Dasan. Why would a powerful Apache warrior speak so gently? Why did he protect her without ever reaching toward her? And why did she feel safer when he was near? It was the first night Lena had trouble sleeping, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to understand the man sleeping outside her door a little more. About a week after the wedding, Lena decided to return to Mesilla Ridge to see her father and collect a few belongings. She thought the trip would be simple, but she was wrong. The moment she stepped into town, eyes turned toward her. No longer pitying like on the wedding day, but sharp with curiosity, unease, and mostly suspicion. A woman outside the sewing shop whispered to her friend, "Look at her. Poor thing. A wedding night with him. I doubt she slept easy." A man lighting a cigarette glanced at Lena and muttered, "Wonder how long she'll last." Someone even looked straight at her and asked, "You still all right? Still whole?" The question hit harder than a slap, not because she was embarrassed, but because they spoke as if Dasan were an animal and she something that could be damaged. She tried to keep walking, faster now, but a group of young men stumbled out of the saloon, boots thudding against the dry ground. One of them, face flushed with whiskey, stepped in front of her. "Hey, Miss Carter, tell us, how was that first night with the Apache? Did he make you kneel so he could—" He didn't finish. Lena pulled back, trembling with disgust. But the man only laughed and reached toward her hair. "Back off," she whispered, voice cracking. At that moment, the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the street. Not loud, not rushed, but heavy enough that the ground lightly vibrated. The drunk turned, and the color drained from his face. Dasan was riding toward them, eyes not angry as the town expected, but cold in a way that pulled silence over everything. He dismounted and stepped between Lena and the men. He didn't draw a knife. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, tall enough that his shadow covered half the street. She told you to stop, Dasan said, voice deep but steady. The drunk tried to puff his chest. Who do you think you... Dasan didn't let him finish. He lifted one hand, open-palmed, not touching anyone, but close enough for every man there to understand that taking even half a step forward would end badly. And still, he didn't lay a hand on them. He held to a line, as if reminding himself that force was a last resort. The air thickened. One man behind the drunk muttered, "Don't be stupid. He's not joking." The drunk stepped back, still wanting to speak but losing the courage. Dasan gave him a long look before turning to Lena, his voice lowered, meant only for her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her hand trembled so much she had to hide it in her skirt. For the first time since the wedding, his presence didn't frighten her. It made her feel safe. Dasan extended his hand halfway, then stopped, leaving the choice to her. "Do you want me to walk with you, or do you want to go alone?" Lena saw the stares around her, sharp, probing, daring her to fall apart, and she understood she couldn't carry this weight by herself. "I want you to come with me," she whispered. Dasan nodded. He didn't touch her, but walked just ahead of her, shielding her from every gaze. The town fell silent as they passed. No one dared say a word. Near her father's house, Lena finally spoke. "Thank you for coming," Dasan answered, calm and simple. "I heard you." She blinked. "I didn't call for you." He looked at her, eyes steady with a quiet truth. "I didn't need to hear your voice." The words held her still. For the first time, the distance between them didn't feel impossible. And for the first time, she felt her heart shift the smallest bit, opening toward a man she once feared. After what happened in town, Lena returned to the Apache village carrying a mix of fear, confusion, and something she hadn't expected: gratitude. Dasan hadn't fought anyone, hadn't stirred up more division, hadn't acted like the dangerous man everyone assumed he was. He had simply stepped in front of her like a silent wall, steady enough to shut down every cruel whisper. But what stayed with her the most was the moment he asked, "Do you want me to walk with you?" He didn't claim the right. He didn't assume. He asked. That night, while Lena was tending the fire, Dasan headed toward the spring to fetch water. Before leaving, he said, "If you want to see your real wedding gift, follow me tomorrow morning." Lena blinked. "But you already gave me the rights to the eastern spring." Dasan shook his head. "That's only the paper. It's not the gift." At dawn, she followed him through the sparse trees. The walk wasn't long, but the path was narrow, weaving between rocks and low brush. Dasan stayed behind her on the difficult stretches and moved ahead when the way widened. Lena noticed something she shouldn't have cared about, but did anyway. He matched his steps to hers, never letting her fall behind or walk alone between the shadows. When they reached the spring, the sun was just rising over the eastern cliffs, turning the water into a sheet of glass. Lena had never seen it up close. The pool wasn't large, but the water was clear and cold, moving gently over stones polished by years of wind and prayer. She hadn't even found the right words when Dasan pointed to the smooth rocks along the edge, placed there with purpose generations ago. "My ancestors came here to protect new families," he said. "When an Apache man marries, he brings his wife to this place to speak the one thing that matters most." Lena froze. This was not a ritual she'd heard whispered about in town. This felt older, deeper, and strangely sacred. Dasan knelt and dipped both hands into the water, When he lifted them again, droplets clung to his palms, catching the early light. "I can't give you what white men give," he said quietly. "A big house, a safe life built far from hardship." Lena opened her mouth to protest, but he went on. "What I can give you is the only thing I believe in. I won't let you live in fear." It wasn't a grand vow. It wasn't romantic poetry. It was a promise carved from the same earth he came from. Solid, honest, heavy as stone. Then he pressed both wet palms onto the rock. Water seeped outward, leaving the shape of his hands, large, steady, and slowly fading into the morning sun. "This is my promise," he said. Lena stared at the imprint. It was simple. It was temporary. And for some reason, it felt more permanent than anything written on paper. "I don't know what I can give you," she whispered. Dasan answered immediately. "You don't owe me anything. A real husband doesn't take from his wife. He protects her and waits to see what she chooses." The words tightened her chest. Not with fear, but with something far gentler. Something she didn't dare name yet. On the way back, Dasan walked beside her instead of in front or behind. He didn't touch her, but he didn't create distance either. As if the promise by the spring had shifted something between them, adjusting their pace into the same rhythm. And for the first time since the forced marriage, Lena didn't feel like she was being pulled into a life she didn't choose. For the first time, she felt like she was stepping into it. About a week after the trip to the eastern spring, trouble in Mesilla Ridge began to spread like a dry wind, carrying sparks. No one knew who started it, but by late afternoon, the entire town was whispering that Lena was being kept inside the Apache village. Some claimed she wasn't allowed to leave. Others swore she was probably scared to ask for help. Not one of them had stepped anywhere near the tribal boundary, yet they spoke as if they had seen it themselves. At the saloon, a few half-drunk men talked louder than the rest. "I'm telling you that Apache must be forcing her to serve him." Another chimed in. "Poor girl. Lena Carter has always been easy to control." And one man, bold in the way only a coward can be, said, if she wanted to come home, she sure wouldn't dare say so. The rumors reached her father quickly. Carter, stubborn and hot-tempered, took every word as truth. He did not wait for his daughter to return. He did not ask her anything. He simply believed one thing. He needed to take his daughter back from the savages. So one dusty afternoon, he gathered 6 armed men and marched straight toward the Apache boundary. That day, Lena was hanging newly woven blankets, while Dasan was repairing the roof of a neighbor's shelter. When she saw her father approaching, her heart tightened. Not from joy, not from longing, but because she recognized the look in his eyes. It was not the look of a father wanting to embrace his child. It was the look of a man who believed he had been insulted. Carter pointed at her. "You, come here." Lena stepped forward, then stopped when he barked. "I will not allow you to stay with these people. You're coming home." The men behind him nodded, treating his words like gospel. Lena did not move, not because she resisted him, but because her heart no longer lived in the town that claimed her. One man lifted his rifle slightly and growled at Dasan, "Step aside. You have no right to keep another man's wife." Lena took a quick step toward them. "He is not keeping me. He has never forced me into anything." Her words meant nothing to them. The click of a gun being cocked drowned her voice. Dasan stepped forward and positioned himself between her and the rifles. He lifted both hands, palms open, holding no weapon, threatening no one. "I will not fight," he said. If she wishes to leave, I will not stop her. But if she wishes to stay, she has the right to stay." The men scoffed. "You think your wife has a choice?" Lena clenched her fists. This was the moment she had never imagined her life would demand of her. She had to choose where she stood, who she believed, and what life she wanted. She looked at her father, the man who had taught her to read, yet always treated her as an obligation. Then she looked at Dasan, the man who had never once demanded anything of her, who bowed for her in front of the entire town, who promised to protect her without taking away her freedom. Lena stepped forward and stood beside Dasan. Silence dropped over them like a heavy cloth. Carter stared at her. "Lena, do you even know what you're doing?" Lena took a breath. Her voice was small but steady. "I do. I am not being kept. I am not being controlled. I am staying because this is the first place where I feel peace." Dasan turned his head slightly toward her. He did not smile. He did not look surprised. He simply stood there like the solid ground she had chosen to stand on. One man muttered angrily, "So she chooses that Apache?" Lena met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "No, I choose myself." The words stunned them. There was no enemy to shoot, no battle to win. Only a truth they did not want to face. A 19-year-old girl had found safety in the place they feared most. After a moment of hesitation, the men retreated. Carter gave his daughter one last look, his eyes burning with anger and something that looked almost like hurt, then turned away without a word. When they disappeared into the dust, Lena realized her hands were shaking. Dasan spoke softly. "If you choose to leave, I will take you home. I will not be angry." Lena looked at him, her eyes wet. "No, I've made my choice." And in that moment, she spoke to him in a way she never had before, a way that sounded less like fear and more like choosing him. After the group of men left, the sky grew darker. Clouds dipped low and the wind pressed against the roof of the lodge, making a long whistling sound. Lena sat beside the fire, fingers gripping the woven blanket the old Apache woman had given her on the first day. She did not speak, but her heart pounded with everything that had happened. She knew she had just chosen a path that would change her entire life. Yet what shook her the most was not standing against her father. It was the quiet look in Dasan's eyes as he stood beside her, as if he had already accepted that she had the right to choose anything, even something that could break him. Later that night, Dasan returned after checking the perimeter. He set down his spear and sat at a respectful distance. "You do not have to explain anything," he said, his voice steady and low. "On tomorrow I will take you to speak with the elders so that no one in the tribe questions your place here. And if you want to return to the town—" Lena interrupted softly. "I am not going back. I will still be here tomorrow, and the days after that." Dasan froze. For the first time, he looked at her not only with calmness, but with something warmer, something he had been hiding since the day they married. "Why?" he asked, like a man who believed he had no right to hear her answer. Lena turned the blanket in her hands, a small smile touching her lips. "Because you never treated me like an object, because you gave me the right to choose, and because I feel safer here than anywhere in Mesilla Ridge." The fire cracked, as if agreeing. Dasan bowed his head. He said no beautiful words and did not thank her. He simply sat there in quiet, the way he faced every important moment in his life. But his eyes were different now, softer, less guarded. carrying a tenderness Lena had never seen. At dawn, they walked together to the eastern spring. Lena sat on the large stone where Dasan had placed his handprint the day before. He stood beside her, watching the flow of the water. "I want to take you into town again," he said. "Not to return you, to show them the true wedding gift." Lena stared at him, confused, but followed. When they returned to Mesilla Ridge, the entire town paused as if expecting them. The blacksmith, the priest, the shopkeeper, even the same men who mocked her the day before were gathered. They watched Lena stand tall beside Dasan, not hiding, not shrinking, and they watched the Apache warrior walk into the center of town without a hint of challenge or fear. Dasan reached into his pouch and took out an object. Not a knife, not a weapon, a long leather cord with a polished turquoise stone set at the center. He held it up for everyone to see. "This is my true wedding gift. Not for her, for all of you." The town murmured in confusion. Lena looked at him, unsure. Dasan turned to her. "In my tribe, a man gives this stone only when he swears to protect his wife's family with his life. It no longer belongs to me. It belongs to her. And because she is a daughter of Mesilla Ridge, it protects this town as well." He placed the turquoise into her hands and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I do not want war. I do not want to take anything from anyone. I only want her to live in peace. If anyone tries to take her by force, they will have to go through me." Silence swept through the town. Lena stared at the stone, her hand trembling, not out of fear, but because she understood what it meant. This was not just a gift. It was a vow. A vow that an Apache man makes only once in his life, and only when he means every word. The priest lowered his head. The men who mocked her stared at the ground. Her father stood behind them, his face red with shame. And Mesilla Ridge, the town that once believed she had been traded away, now fell quiet because of a gift no one expected. In that silence, Lena walked to Dasan and stood beside him without hesitation, without waiting for permission. She stood there as if that was the only place she belonged, and from that moment on, the people of Mesilla Ridge no longer called her the Carter girl who had been forced into marriage. They called her the wife of Dasan, the Apache man who made an entire town bow its head. If you have stayed until this final moment, then perhaps the story of Lena and Dasan touched a quiet corner of your heart, the corner reserved for respect, for quiet love, and for the soft kind of beauty people offer one another without needing to show it off. On a harsh frontier, folks often believe peace is held by guns, but sometimes it is held by small things, a promise made beside a spring, a handprint left on a stone, or a turquoise stone placed into the palm of the one you choose to protect. If this story reminded you of someone, or simply gave you a peaceful evening, I invite you to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Here we tell gentle, warm, human stories, the kind of Western tales meant for hearts that have lived long enough to understand that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply someone choosing to stand beside you when the rest of the world turns away. Thank you for listening until the end. I hope to see you again in the next story.